Greetings from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm here with J.R. Daniels, who is the organist and music director at Sacred Heart Catholic Church here in the Shadyside section of Pittsburgh. My name's Matt Alosi, and I'm here on behalf of the Oregon Historical Society Oral History Project. So, Mr. Daniels, J.R., tell me a little bit about your childhood.
So I grew up in upstate New York and was very fortunate to belong to a beautiful, big old Catholic church with a historic organ, which had a great influence on me as a child. And I can remember my early years looking back up into the gallery thinking, oh, I want to be up there. I want to see what's going on up there. I want to play that organ.
Terrific. So tell me about your family.
So I grew up in a small Catholic family, 2 brothers. We had a very good exposure to music as a child. My grandmother always played operas when we were kids. So we were exposed to good music from a young age, and both my brothers are very musical as well.
So what were some of the experiences you had in your childhood that got you very interested in pursuing the organ?
I don't know where the desire came from. It was just kind of a natural thing that I was always drawn to the instrument. And I think that happens with most people. For some reason, they have this interest in the instrument. I can remember at an early age drawn to the instrument. And I remember as a kid growing up, my great-grandparents had a big Victorian house with an armoire at the top of the stairs, and my great-grandfather had an accordion there, and I can remember pulling that out and sitting by the edge of the railing, pretending I was playing the organ at church.
Well, so who were some teachers that influenced you as you were growing up?
I had a wonderful friend and teacher, David Fairbanks, who played at the Baptist church in my hometown. And he gave me a lot of encouragement and was very appreciative of the historic instrument at my home church.
So you attended Duquesne University here in Pittsburgh. Can you describe or talk about your education here and at Duquesne?
Well, I had some great teachers throughout my life. My first teacher being Paulette Fry at the Presbyterian Church in my hometown, who got me ready for college, and then had a wonderful experience with my undergrad professor, Robert Cornelison, who really suited me as a teacher, and then was very fortunate to get the full scholarship to do my master's with Anne Labunsky at Duquesne. So I was very fortunate to study with Anne, really enjoyed that, and then had another year of teaching with David Craighead. Those were all incredible teachers, and I was very blessed to have them.
So you've done a lot of teaching yourself. Talk about some students of note or...
Well, I was very fortunate. I didn't have a whole lot of students. I had a lot of piano students over the years, but I had 2 great organ students, Russell Wiseman, who's gone on to do his doctorate and doing all kinds of great things, and Candace Akins, who did her master's at Carnegie Mellon with I can't think of his name off the top of my head, Don Wilkins. And I have a young student now that's 12 years old who's going to do good things as well.
So you had said at some point that you were working on a dissertation for a doctoral degree. Mm-hmm. What was your dissertation?
So I was very interested, and still am, in the music of Theodore Salome, who was a French Romantic organist and composer. I got to go to Paris twice, found all of his music that's now out of print at the Bibliothèque Nationale. I got to play at the choir organ at La Trinité, where he played. Got to meet his great nephew, who was still living at the time. And visited his grave at Père Lachaise Cemetery, which is just about 20 feet from Jim Morrison's grave, if you ever go there.
So what about the composer drew you to him?
I actually heard one of his pieces played at an OHS convention and tried to find the piece, and it was out of print. And I've discovered that anything that was written in Paris between 1850 and 1900, I will love.
So as young people are growing and having similar musical journeys, what would your advice be to them about pursuing a degree or a certificate in music?
Definitely do it. I always was influenced by other people who didn't go into music and told me that they always regretted it. We had a friend that was a medical doctor, and he said that was his biggest regret, that he never played his violin after he graduated from medical school. He made lots of money and his family was going to live well, but he was never happy.
So have you done any compositions of your own?
Yes, I have written several things. I think 3 things are in publication right now. I wrote an anthem for choir and organ that's done very well. I've wrote another anthem for choir and one organ piece that are in print.
Okay. So what would be your fondest memory of being a church musician and organist here in Pittsburgh?
I would say one of my most pleasant memories was playing for a mass where my choir was just perfect, where I played perfectly, and everything went well. That doesn't happen obviously every week, but there have been several that I can think of that really were beautiful musical experiences.
So, tell us about the Biggs Fellowship.
So at the convention in New Haven, Connecticut, I had seen it advertised and was very intrigued with it and wanted to attend. And at the time, I had no money. Saw that there was this Biggs Fellowship, so I applied for it and got it. Paid for my registration and my hotel there. And that was my first OHS convention. Met some beautiful people who I'm still friends with to this day. Got to see some incredible instruments, including the hook instrument that's at St. Mary's in New Haven, which is one of my favorite instruments. And it was just a all-around wonderful experience.
What are your memories of or things that stand out from OHS conventions?
I love meeting all the people. It's a very friendly group. Without sounding critical, the AGO conventions are tend to be a little bit more snobby. I think the people at the OHS conventions are really there for the music and to make connections, and it's just a much more friendly group.
So what makes performing for an OHS audience special?
I know that they're there to hear the instrument. Not that they're not critical about good playing, but they're not there to criticize you. They're there to enjoy that experience of the instrument, the building, and your performance.
Okay, so in 2018, you hosted the OHS convention here in Pittsburgh.
It was in 2010.
2010, okay.
Right? Mm-hmm.
How did that come about?
I got a random phone call from this guy, Jim Stark, and he said, "We need to meet. I don't think I know you, but we need to meet." And we met for lunch, and he said, "I think there's enough instruments in Pittsburgh that we could have an OHS convention. I don't want to do it by myself. Would you do it with me?" And I said, "Sure." So I knew there were quite a few important instruments, and that ended up being a very successful convention, I think. I know I had 2 different people that pulled me aside in recent years that told me that was their favorite convention ever.
What is your favorite organ here in Pittsburgh?
Oh, my favorite organ is definitely the Beckeroth at St. Paul's Cathedral. I was very fortunate. 25 years ago, I was asked to help out there for daily mass just during Lent on Mondays. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll be glad to do that. And 25 years later, I'm still playing there all the time. And it's evolved into several days a week for morning mass, which is televised, and then helping out on Saturdays and Sunday evenings as I'm available. But that Beckeroth instrument was such a landmark instrument. And as a child, 14 years old, my friend David Fairbanks, who was the organist of the Baptist Church in Cortland, gave me a bunch of old diapason magazines. And I remember on the cover of the one from 1962 was this Beckeroth organ. And I thought, if I could just go there someday and play that organ and meet Paul Koch. And I did. And now I've been playing there 25 years. So that's been a dream come true for me.
So in 2014, you performed at the OHS convention in Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
I'll tell you something. That was a truly remarkable experience because I felt my life had come full circle. So I got to play at my home church on the Maureen Barnes Tracker organ, which has an OHS citation. And now I'm researching Clarence Maury and writing a book on him. But to come back years later after starting playing there at age 14 and play for my colleagues in that incredible space with people from the church that knew me as a child, and then my colleagues, and to expose them to that beautiful instrument. And I also got to premiere a piece by Theodore Salome that was never performed before, that he wrote for organ and strings. So that was one of the highlights of my life.
So how has the OHS continued to serve as a resource for you?
They've been super helpful in the sense that both Marcia Summers and Wakenhorst were graciously opening the library and archives to me when I went there last year to do some research on Clarence Maury. They had several things there that they were able to scan for me and could not have been more helpful.
That's terrific. So how do you think that OHS can remain relevant in the coming decades?
I think that they're doing a very good job of doing non-traditional things and it seems like there are more and more young people that are joining and that are getting interested in it, which is wonderful. You know, they went from a small group that was only interested in just looking at tracker organs in 1956 to now appreciating instruments that have any kind of historic merit. So sometimes we'll go to conferences and you'll hear an instrument from maybe 1850, but you'll also hear something that was just built a few years ago that has a significance. But I think that they're doing a very good job in reaching out to young people.
So we're here at the beautiful Sacred Heart Catholic Church. Describe your responsibilities here.
So I have two choirs here, my adults and kids, and play for all the weekend masses. Choirs sing on Sunday, and rehearsals. I'm on staff and on call for funerals and weddings. We had 62 weddings last summer. This summer, not quite as many, but it's just been a dream come true to be in this place.
So have you made any changes to the program since you started working here?
It's definitely grown. When I started, we just had a few people in the choir. So I've now, if everybody's there, I have 24 with the young people. I started with maybe 10 or 12 kids, and we have 35 now. We have a very healthy school here. So the kids are from the school are the ones that sing.
So is there a restoration project that you've been involved with that you're most proud of?
I wouldn't say there's one that I've been most proud of, but I have one that's eminent here. I'm hoping to get our 1931 E.M. Skinner completed and restored. The organ was put in 1931, but because the building was not finished and funds were not available, only 1/3 of it was put in. It's been added to over the years, but I'm hoping that we can complete it as was intended or close to it, and then hopefully have what's already here completely restored.
Well, so tell me a little bit about the book that you're researching on Clarence Morey.
Okay. Well, Clarence Morey is kind of the last line of this tradition of upstate New York Utica organ builders, which started with Elvinza Andrews, who came from England. Morey died in 1935, and during his 63 years, built some 261 instruments, which is fairly significant, but his work really needs to be documented. And I fortunately came into possession of 2 scrapbooks that he compiled with photos of his instruments and several things from his family, photos, and some other archival things that I found at the OHS library.
So when you're doing a restoration, it involves sometimes seeking grants. Do you have any recommendations for people that are applying for grants?
No, I was going to say, if you can help me, let me know, because I'm applying for 2 grants that I'm hoping will help with our restoration project here.
So in addition to being an exceptional organist here in Pittsburgh, you're also famous for your wonderful cakes that you bake. So what are your top 3 cakes that you have baked for all of your wonderful friends?
Top 3 cakes would be banana cake that I got from my grandmother's recipe, red velvet cake, and probably the zucchini blueberry cake, I think are the top 3.
I would concur. Okay, so are there any projects or something that you would like to work on should you decide to retire?
Actually, yes. I really will do everything in my power to see that the 1895 Morey and Barnes organ at my home church is restored. It's still playable. It's used every Sunday, but it needs a complete restoration, and I want to see that completed before I die.
Well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and good luck.
Thank you, Matt. We're at the Sacred Heart Church here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This incredible building is due to the efforts of a brilliant man by the name of Father Thomas Coakley. Coakley worked as a secretary for one of the industrialists here in the 1890s. Became a Catholic priest, was ordained in Rome in 1908. Served as a chaplain in World War I, and was almost killed by a stray bullet which hit his chalice while he was celebrating Mass on the battlefield. Came back from the war and had a job in the chancery, and then was named pastor of Sacred Heart Church, which at that time was a very modest red brick building a few blocks away next to the railroad tracks. Coakley had this vision to build his dream church, so he became friends with an architect by the name of John Comas, who was a graduate of Carnegie Tech. Incredible architect who built quite a few churches throughout Pittsburgh and throughout the country. Unfortunately, Comas died somewhat unexpectedly at the young age of 44 in 1922. So Coakley found another architect by the name of Carlton Strong, who was from Buffalo, he convinced Strong to move to Pittsburgh and convert to Catholicism. And the two of them began plans for building a new church. Because the church was basically Irish and English Catholics, Coakley wanted it to be reminiscent of churches throughout Great Britain. So they came up with this design. It's not a copy of anything, but definitely was influenced by the churches throughout the UK. Coakley and the architect Carlton Strong and the contractor Mr. Gallagher did 2 trips to Great Britain to look at churches that influenced this building. Construction began in 1924, and the church was built in basically 4 stages as they raised money. If you'll notice above the front entrance, you see Christ, priest, and king in the center, and to the left, the Old Testament high priest Melchizedek, and to the right, Old Testament King David, and of course Christ, the culmination of both those 2 figures. As we come inside, you'll notice the building has beautiful native stone from here in western Pennsylvania. Coakley felt that the church should be constructed mainly of stone. He said he did not want marble, that marble was only for banks and courthouses. So when you come in, if you look up, you'll notice the ceiling. The ceiling is reminiscent of the inverted hull of a ship. The idea is that the church is our vessel to eternity. So that imagery is reflected throughout the church. You'll notice the light fixtures with the Fresnel lenses, like you would see on the ship. And behind you, 2 captains, if you will, Noah of the Old Testament Ark on the left, and St. Peter the fisherman on the right. Behind them, you'll see the stained glass window that at the time that was put in was the 3rd largest stained glass window in the world. Father Coakley wanted red. He said that all churches have blue windows and he wanted red. And this window depicts the history of Catholicism in America. Now you'll also notice that at the base of these trusses are the 12 apostles, plus Matthias and St. Paul. And of course, if we have the original 12 apostles, this is one of the few churches that has Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Christ, who's depicted clutching his money bag, covering his head in shame while the angels weeping above him. Now, as I mentioned, Father Coakley had a very intellectual spirituality, which is also reflected in this building. He wanted everything focused on what was going on the altar. He did not want any distractions. He did not want votive candles or statues. And if you'll notice, these stone carvings are Catholic intellectual people like Copernicus, Pasteur, Mendel, Gutenberg, and all these incredibly brilliant Catholic minds. So as we come into the church, you'll notice the floor. This is what is called the path of virtue. And there are 62 virtues that are symbolized in the floor. And these virtues are virtues that we should embody as we're walking through life and approaching the altar. So the main part of the church, the nave, was completed in 1928. You'll notice our bells were not added till the church was completed in 1954. But if you take a look over here, we have the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. That was completed in 1939. And the tabernacle, the candlesticks, and the crucifix in there were crafted in France. sort of a cloisonne design, and they were on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City for 6 months before they came here. If you'll notice, the one window, well, all of the windows in the chapel are different rites of the Catholic Church. So we have the Roman Rite, Coptic Rite, Maronite Rite, Byzantine Rite. And the first window is Father Coakley offering Mass on the battlefield with a doughboy behind him. On the other side, we have the Lady Chapel. The Lady Chapel was completed in 1954 when the tower and the bells were also completed. The bells were cast in Croydon, South London by Gillette and Johnston. And there were 3 bells, Walter, Raphael, and Thomas, named for Father Thomas Coakley. Walter Carroll, who was Bishop Carroll's brother, and Raphael, who I don't know was named after, but they sound pitches of A, D, and F sharp. So there's a bright D major chord when you hear that peal. As you come forward, you'll notice this is very English style with the choir divided and the organ in front here. And this is crafted from stone, which is indigenous to every country that's depicted here in the map. If you notice, there are some pins here. These are the places where Father Coakley, Carlton Strong, and Mr. Gallagher visited on their trip to the British Isles. Behind me, you'll notice these beautiful curtains. Originally, there were curtains for every liturgical color. Unfortunately, they're 95 years old now. And we've decided just to leave up the gold ones year round because they've just deteriorated so much. They're really, really getting very thin and dry rotting. I did find the company that made these called Art Bruges in Brussels and talked with them. They could craft new curtains for us. They would have to be custom crafted, and they would run about $35,000 a panel. So again, when you look at this incredible building, you have to give Father Coakley so much credit because he did have some obstacles. He had to raise all the money himself. Bishop Boyle at the time told him that he was not to build a new church, that he did not need one, that the brick church on Center Avenue was fine. And Coakley said, no, I'm going to build this church. I'll raise the money. I have a brother who's a stockbroker in Cleveland, and he's going to back me, and he's going to match funds as we raise them. And the bishop said, no, you don't need to do that. And Coakley said, I'm canonically appointed. You can't get rid of me. I'm going to be here till I die, and I'm going to go ahead and do this. So Coakley deliberately had the church built 10 feet longer than the cathedral, and also planned to have the organ have 10 stops larger than the cathedral. At the time of the construction of this, back in the early 30s, there were 2 notorious priests in the Catholic Diocese of Pittsburgh, Father Carlo Rossini, who was in charge of music for the diocese, and Father Carl Sanderbeck, who was in charge of liturgy for the diocese. And they were known to show up unannounced on a given Sunday morning at any parish. And if you were not doing things properly, you would be written up on the blacklist. And they would throw out your music and yell at you. And so one Sunday they came here to Sacred Heart, and Father Rossini was furious because Father Coakley had his organist and choir singing all of the propers out of the Liber Usualis. Rossini said those chants are too difficult. You shouldn't be doing them. They're too difficult. You should be doing the simple chants that I wrote, the simple propers that I wrote that are being done throughout the diocese. And that's what you should be doing here at Sacred Heart. And Father Coakley said, no, I have a professional organist and I have a paid professional men's choir, and we're doing the chants that the church is asking us to sing out of the Liber Visualis. And Rossini said, I understand you're going to build an organ that is 10 stops larger than the cathedral. You cannot do that. And Coakley said, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And it's too bad. So all this back and forth is depicted here in this beautiful stone carving. Up at the top is Father Coakley praying his breviary in the library. And down here we have the devil casting into hell 2 priests. Father Sanderbeck with the Nazi swastika, and Father Rossini with the Italian fascist symbol, and the 10 organ pipes representing the 10 ranks or 10 organ stops of the Skinner organ here. So anyway, the organ was not completed. In 1931, Skinner put in 33 ranks. It was prepared for 90 ranks. It was never completed. Unfortunately, my predecessor got rid of the original console, which Carlton Strong designed and had Skinner build with the linen fold panels that you see in the choir here. I'm hoping we do have the original drawings at the OHS in their archives, and I'm hoping that when we get the organ restored, we can have a new replica console built. But you'll see the facade was never finished. We have just gold curtains. So this is the Sacred Heart Church. So the organ here is a 1931 E.M. Skinner, Opus 855. This console was added about 10, 15 years ago. This is the Aeolian Skinner console from, I believe, Broadway Tabernacle Baptist Church in Brooklyn from about 1956. We recently had some water damage in one of the chambers. Hopefully our insurance is going to cover that, but some of the stops are not available for use on the choir division because we got water that came in and ruined the chest and the pipework for several of the stops. So when I was 14 and started playing at my home church, I was in practicing one day, and this gentleman by the name of Cully Mowers came in. Cully wasn't, I don't think, one of the original OHS members, but was definitely one of the earlier first members of the organization. And he started telling me about the organ, which I was intrigued with. And when he got home, sent me this little packet, which I still have. I still have the original envelope and everything, with an OHS handbook from 1980 and some pamphlets that he had printed up of restoration work that he had done. So it was on a Hook and Hastings organ and whatnot. And I can't remember why I didn't know about it, but I was only probably 12 years old at the time. But in 1980, the OHS convention was in upstate New York. The closing concert was at St. Mary's in Portland, my home church. And I wish I had known about it. I would have gone to it. But I got this packet of all these goodies and found out about Hook and Hastings organs and these other tracker organs. And I was all, wow, I have to join this organ historical society. And since then, I've always had a love for the OHS.